There is a kind of sin that has no name, no shape. You won't find it in any law book, won't find it in any scripture. Nobody teaches you how to recognize it, but if you have ever committed it, you know immediately. That feeling, it is not loud, not dramatic, no gunshots, no tears, just an ordinary afternoon. One decision, in a matter of seconds, and then you walk away, like nothing happened. Kwame Asante is one of the most powerful men in Africa. The building that bears his name is the tallest in Accra, 47 floors. From a distance, it looks like a finger pointing straight up at the sky. Forbes called him the architect of the New Africa.
Minister, it's a
to
pleasure
get a meeting
meet
with
you.
him, you need to book
pleasure is
3
all mine,
weeks in
Kwame.
advance.
Thank you for coming.
He has breakfast
Your
with ministers,
hospitality is
dinner with presidents. He shakes hands with billionaires the way most people shake hands with neighbors. But there is a room inside his mansion. At the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor, always locked. Nobody gets in, not even his wife. The housekeeper who has worked there 15 years has never once seen inside. He only shared this, that one time through the crack of the door, he saw a candle, a small table, and a photograph. Never dared to ask about it. Because there are some things that even the richest man alive cannot buy a cure for. And the story today starts from that room, starts from that photograph. Starts from one morning when a young woman walked through the front gates of this house for the very first time, looking for a job. She knew nothing. Did not know whose house this was, did not know who the man inside was, and had absolutely no idea that she had been here before, just in a way she could never have imagined. To understand this story, you need to understand who Kwame Asante really is. Not the man on the magazine covers, not the name on the building, but the real human being on the inside. Kwame was born in Accra in 1971. His father was a merchant, not enormously wealthy, but
Kwame,
enough to send
congratulations on
Kwame
your
to a good
achievement.
school.
Thank you, sir.
Enough to
I'm
buy him
deeply
a
honored.
fresh pressed uniform at the start of every school year. And enough to teach him one lesson that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. That lesson was this: a
Kwame, your
name
actions
matters
have
more than
consequences.
feelings.
I have considered
Status
everything,
matters
and my
more than
decision
the
is
heart,
final. You are to
and
leave
marriage
this place and not
is not a
return
matter
until you have made
between two
amends.
people who love
This
each other.
verdict
It
is
is a
irrevocable.
contract between two families. Kwame grew up with that lesson soaked into his bones. He studied hard, graduated from the University of
Kwame, you
London,
carry our
came home
family's
at
name in
26
honor.
years old,
I understand, Father.
with a degree in his hand
Be
and
strong,
ambition burning
be
in his
wise.
eyes.
The world will test
His
you.
father looked at him and said, "My son, now it truly begins." And it did begin. The first 10 years he barely slept. The next 10 years he built an empire. 10 years after that he became a legend. Asante Resources, a gold and oil extraction conglomerate operating across 11 countries. Asante Tower, the tallest building in Ghana, inaugurated in 2019. Forbes Africa magazine, 5 consecutive years, named him one of the 10 most powerful men on the continent. Kwame never objected to that. He would simply smile, just humble enough, just enough to make people admire him even more. That was something else he learned from his father. Never let others see you trying. Make it look like everything comes to you naturally, and people will believe it. Kwame's mansion sits in East Legon, the wealthiest neighborhood in Accra. 16 bedrooms, a 25-meter swimming pool, a garden designed exclusively by an architect flown in from Singapore, at night looking in from outside. It glows like a diamond in the middle of the city, so beautiful that people pull over just to take photographs. But inside it is different. Kwame eats breakfast alone every single morning, not because there is nobody around, but because he does not want anyone sitting beside him long enough to ask the questions he does not want to answer. His wife, Mrs. Helena Asante, 48 years old, beautiful in the way of someone accustomed to being looked at, always dressed perfectly, always says exactly the right thing, always appears at exactly the right moment. Society magazines call her the first lady of Ghana's business world. She and Kwame have been married 20 years. 2 sons, Kofi and Nana. From the outside, they are the perfect family, but you already know. The things that look most perfect from the outside are usually the most hollow on the inside. Kwame and Helena eat dinner at opposite ends of a 6-meter-long dining table. They talk about schedules, about the children, about the weekend events, but never, not one single time, do they talk about what they are truly thinking. The housekeeper named Emmanuel has worked in that house for 15 years. This old man knows everything. He knows that Mr. Kwame likes his coffee without sugar, but sometimes at 2 in the morning. He makes himself a cup with sugar and drinks it alone in the kitchen. He knows that Mrs. Helena cries in the bathroom, with the water running loud so nobody can hear. He knows that the 2 sons grew up inside this house but do not know what their father actually enjoys. Do not know what frightens him. Emmanuel knows all of these things, but he never speaks of them because he understands houses like this one are not really homes. They are performances, and everyone inside is performing every single day. There is only one room at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. That is the one place where Kwame does not perform. He goes in alone, closes the door behind him, and is simply himself, with the photograph on the table, with the flickering candle, with the pain he has been carrying for 23 years, told to no one, shared with no one, just sitting there, alone, and remembering. Kumasi, the 2nd largest city in Ghana, about 250 kilometers north of Accra. If Accra is a freshly pressed business suit, then Kumasi is a t-shirt washed so many times the color has faded, older, more real. People here do not speak through business cards. They speak through handshakes, through smiles, through splitting a bowl of soup with a neighbor who has nothing to eat that evening. This is where Adwoa Mensah grew up, in a narrow alley, Autumn District. Houses pressed against each other like passengers on a rush-hour bus. Tin roofs, walls with peeling whitewash, children running barefoot on packed dirt, and the sound of high-life music drifting out from somewhere every single evening. That was home. Not perfect, but home. Adwoa's mother, Mrs. Mensah, was a seamstress. Her hands worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, every day, not excepting Saturday, not excepting Sunday, not excepting the days she had a fever, not excepting the days her back hurt so badly she had to sit at an angle just to bear it. She kept sewing, still sat before that old Singer machine and sewed, her fingers hardened over the years, pricked by needles so often that she no longer flinched when blood appeared. She would simply take a small scrap of fabric, dab it gently, and keep sewing. She made wedding dresses for other women for 20 years, and not one single time, not one single time, did she ever wear a wedding dress herself. Adwoa knew this from a young age. Nobody told her. She figured it out on her own. Children who grow up in houses like that, they learn to read silence very early. They know when not to ask questions. They know when their mother is forcing a smile she does not feel. They know when tonight's pot of rice is smaller than yesterday's, and they do not ask why. When Adwoa was 7 years old, one afternoon at school, the child sitting next to her asked, "Where is your father? How come nobody has ever seen him?" Adwoa did not answer right away. She looked down at her own hands, then said, "I don't know." The other child laughed, not out of cruelty, just the laugh of a child who does not yet understand how heavy their own question is. But for Adwoa, that question was like a small crack in a wall. That from that day forward, she could always see. That evening she went home and asked her mother, "Who is my father?" Mrs. Amma set down the garment she was sewing, slowly, looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she sat down beside Adwoa, placed her hand on her shoulder, and said, "There are men who are not strong enough to stay when life gets difficult. That is not your fault. That is their failure. You are not missing anything. You have me." Then she stood up, went back to the sewing table, and kept sewing. Adwoa learned not to ask a second time, but that question never went away. It only changed shape as the years passed. At 10 years old, what does my father look like? At 15, why did he leave us? At 20, does he ever think about me? And at 23, when her mother lay in a hospital bed, a drip line running into her arm, her body visibly thinner week by week, that question disappeared entirely. There was simply no room for it anymore, because by then the only thing left inside Adwoa was one thing: fear. The fear of losing the only person she had in this world. Pancreatic cancer. The doctor said from the time of diagnosis to death is usually no more than 8 months. Mrs. Amma was diagnosed in July. She passed the following March. 8 months, exactly as the doctors said. During those 8 months, Adwoa never left the hospital. She slept on a hard plastic chair beside her mother's bed, ate packaged food, bathed in the public bathroom at the end of the hallway, and every single day, she sat there, holding her mother's hand, and tried to memorize everything. The way her mother breathed, The way she looked out the window each morning. Elf. The way she smiled when Adwoa brought in a bowl of porridge. Even when the pain was so great could not eat, she still smiled. Elf. Because she did not want her daughter to worry. On the morning of the final day, Mrs. Amma woke earlier than usual, gripped Adwoa's hand more tightly than before. Elf. That hand roughened and hardened by 20 years of sewing alone to raise her child. She pressed a brown envelope into Adwoa's hands, old, crumpled. Elf. The edges worn as though it had been picked up and put back many times over. Only open this when you are ready. Not now. Elf. Not while you are in pain, only when you are strong enough. What is inside, Mama? Mrs. Amma looked at her daughter with a strange smile. Elf. Both sorrowful and peaceful at once, like someone who has finally found a place to set down something they have been carrying for far too long. The truth. Elf. And the truth is heavy, my child. You have to be strong enough to carry it. Those were the last words Mrs. Amma spoke to her daughter that afternoon. Elf. She passed, quietly, like someone drifting off to sleep. Adwoa stood at her mother's grave alone. No extended family, no close friends. Elf. Only a few neighbors who came out of courtesy. The sky over Kumasi that day was overcast. No rain, but heavy. Elf. The kind of heaviness that fills the air before a storm breaks. Adwoa did not cry then. She stood straight, eyes fixed on the grave, thinking, what now? Elf. She cried that night. When she came home, saw the old Singer sewing machine still sitting there, a piece of fabric still half sewn. Elf. Her mother had not had time to finish it. Adwoa sat down on the floor, covered her face, and wept. For the first time since her mother passed. Elf. The brown envelope. She buried it at the bottom of her suitcase. Not ready. 3 months later, the rent ran out. Adwoa sold her mother's sewing machine. Elf. She sat and watched as the men carried it out of the house, and felt as though she were selling away a piece of her mother's body. Elf. But she had no other choice. She folded her clothes into the suitcase, tucked the brown envelope into the deepest corner, bought a bus ticket to Accra. Elf. In her pocket she had 200 cedis, one folder of job applications, and a question she had carried for 16 years that had never once been answered. Elf. She did not know Accra, had nobody there, had no guarantees waiting for her. Only one thing, the one thing Mrs. Amma had left her. Not money, not a house. Elf. Not a name, just a sentence, repeated so many times for 23 years that by now it had soaked into her blood. My child, never give up, no matter what. Elf. Accra did not welcome Adwoa. Accra did not welcome anyone. It is the kind of city where you have to find your own footing. Nobody steps aside for you. Elf. Nobody points you in the right direction. You either swim or you sink. Adwoa rented a small room in the Nima district, 8 square meters, 1 bed. Elf. One old fan that whined like it was crying, and one window that looked directly into the wall of the building next door. She submitted applications everywhere, offices, shops, hotels, schools. 2 weeks passed. Nobody called back. 3 weeks. The money started running thin. She ate less, walked instead of taking taxis, and every evening before sleep. Elf. She looked at the brown envelope sitting on the edge of her bed, then closed her eyes. Not yet. The 4th week, the employment agency called. They had a position. Elf. A housemaid at a private mansion in East Legan. The monthly salary was enough to cover her rent with a little left over. Adwoa accepted immediately, without asking many questions. The next morning, she put on the cleanest blue dress she owned, tidied her hair, and went. The address was number 14, Ambassadorial Road, East Legan. When the taxi stopped in front of the gate, Adwoa looked out the window, and for the first time since arriving in Accra, she did not know what to feel. Iron gates nearly 3 meters tall, painted a deep glossy black, palm trees planted on either side standing as straight and even as soldiers on guard. Beyond them, visible only faintly through the trees, a house. No, not a house, a palace. Adwoa paid the driver, stepped out, stood before the gate, and drew one long, slow breath. Mrs. Amma used to say, never let your surroundings unsettle you. Look at what is on the inside before you decide what something truly is. Adwoa knocked. The housekeeper opened the gate, a middle-aged man, a kind face, but eyes that were sharp and observant, the kind of eyes that have watched many people come and go. His name was Emmanuel. He led Adwoa inside, and for the first time in her life, Adwoa stepped into a space she had no words to describe. White marble floors that reflected the light like the surface of still water, a spiral staircase of teak wood rising to the 2nd floor. A chandelier from Austria hanging in the center of the living room. Paintings on the walls, all original works, not prints. Originals. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of sandalwood. Adwoa did not stand in admiration, she observed. Mrs. Ama had taught her that. Never be overwhelmed by appearances. Look at what is genuinely there beneath the surface. And what Adwoa noticed immediately. This house was extraordinarily beautiful. But there was no laughter in it, no sound of children, no smell of food being cooked, none of the small beautiful disorder of a life truly being lived. Everything was too perfect, too neat, too silent, like a showroom, not a place where people actually lived. Emmanuel led her into a small sitting room off to the side. Mrs. Helena was already seated there, back straight as a ruler, hands folded on her lap, a cup of coffee on the table in front of her untouched. She looked Adwoa over from head to toe, slowly, revealing nothing. Sit down. Adwoa sat. Where are you from? Kumasi, ma'am. Your education? College diploma in management. No work yet in my field. Why did you choose this kind of work? Adwoa looked directly into Mrs. Helena's eyes. Because I need work now. And I am not afraid of working with my hands. Mrs. Helena held her gaze. A moment longer than usual. Something flashed through her expression. Very fast, very faint. Then it was gone. Very well. 2 weeks trial. Adwoa nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Helena rose from her chair, turned to Emmanuel. Show her the house rules. Then she walked out, without looking back. Emmanuel watched her go, then turned to Adwoa. His voice dropped lower, softer, like a man sharing something that mattered. There are things you need to know. First, do not enter the library without permission. Second, do not ask questions about the family. Third, use only the service elevator. Never the main staircase. And fourth, this one especially, do not go near the hallway at the far end of the second floor. Why not? Adwoa asked. Emmanuel looked at her, did not answer right away. Then he said quietly, in a house like this, my dear, the best question is the one you do not ask. Adwoa looked at him, then nodded. She already understood this kind of house. Large houses always have rooms that nobody is permitted to mention. The first 2 days Adwoa did not encounter the owner, Emmanuel explained. Mr. Asante was traveling on business in Singapore. He would return at the weekend. Adwoa worked, cleaned, arranged, observed. She noticed small things. In the dining room there were 2 chairs at opposite ends of the table. The distance between them was wide enough to seat 6 more people in between without crowding. In the refrigerator there were always 2 separate types of coffee, one without sugar, one with, kept on different shelves. In the living room there were 3 large paintings, of all landscapes, not a single family photograph anywhere, not one. Small things like that others might not notice, but Adwoa noticed everything. Because she had grown up in a home where every small detail carried meaning, and she knew. Houses with no family photographs on the walls are usually houses where memories are being kept hidden. Friday afternoon, the front door opened. Adwoa was cleaning the staircase. She did not look up. House rules. Footsteps on the marble floor. Heavy, steady, even. The footsteps of someone accustomed to giving orders, accustomed to being served, accustomed to people moving out of the way when he walks. Where is Helena? A deep voice, not loud, but the kind of voice that fills a room without effort. She is at the spa, sir. Emmanuel called from the kitchen. A brief exhale. Then silence. The footsteps continued past. 1 meter from where Adwoa was kneeling, they stopped. Adwoa felt a gaze drop down toward her. She did not raise her head, kept her hand moving steadily, as though nothing was happening. Then the footsteps continued, up the staircase, toward the private office on the second floor. Adwoa exhaled, softly, very softly. She did not understand why. When those footsteps passed by her, her heart had beaten faster than usual. Not from fear. It was something else, something she had no name for. She bent back down and kept cleaning. And did not think about it further. Not yet. Saturday morning. The sky over Accra was unusually blue that day. The kind of blue that appears on days when you do not know what is about to happen. But your body knows. Mrs. Helena left the house at 8. A charity event at the Kempinski Hotel, scheduled until 2 in the afternoon. Mr. Asante was in a video conference in his private office on the second floor. He had asked not to be disturbed before 11. Emmanuel assigned Adwoa her task. His voice casual, like any other day. Go and clean the library on the first floor. The door is already open. Mrs. Helena forgot to lock it this morning. Finish quickly and come out. Adwoa nodded, took her cleaning cart, and went. The library door was slightly ajar. She pushed it gently, stepped inside, and paused for just a moment. The library stretched about 15 meters in length, shelves running from floor to ceiling, nearly 4 meters high. Thousands of books arranged with perfect neatness. Adwoa could tell immediately just by looking at the spines. Many of these books had never been opened, covers still glossy, spines still rigid, books put there to be seen, not to be read. She began cleaning left, right, top to bottom, steady, careful, not thinking about much, until she reached the 5th shelf, the far inner corner. Beside the window overlooking the garden, she saw something, not a book, a picture frame, placed facing the wall. Adwoa stopped, looked at that frame, and for a reason she could not explain, not then, and not even later when she tried, she reached out and turned it around. The photograph was taken outdoors. Warm golden afternoon light, the kind of light that only exists in Ghana around 4 in the afternoon, when the sun has not yet set but has already begun to soften. In the photograph was a young man, around 28 or 29 years old, a wide smile, unguarded, not the kind of smile people put on for photographs, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who is genuinely happy. His eyes were smiling before his mouth was. Beside him, a woman, her hands cradling a large pregnant belly, 7 or 8 months along. She was beautiful in the way of someone truly at peace. No makeup, no jewelry, just a light across her face, the kind of light no beauty salon can manufacture. And the light in that photograph was not the light of something taken for social media, not taken because someone needed a nice image. This was a photograph taken because 2 people wanted to hold on to a moment before it passed. Adwoa looked at the man in the photograph. His eyes, those eyes. She stood completely still. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Something moved inside her chest. Not pain, not joy. A strange feeling. Like hearing a melody you are absolutely certain you have never heard before, but you already know every single note by heart. Like walking into a room you have never entered and feeling certain you have been here before. She did not understand what the feeling was. Only that she could not put the photograph down. The sound of heels on marble floor, sharp, quick, the footsteps of someone walking with purpose. Adwoa turned around. Mrs. Helena was standing at the library door. She had come home earlier than expected, her coat still on, handbag still in her hand. She looked at Adwoa, looked at the photograph in Adwoa's hands, and in a fraction of a second, just a fraction, Mrs. Helena's face changed. Not anger, not surprise, fear, a very real fear. A very deep fear, the fear of someone who has been afraid of this moment for a very long time. Then it was gone, as quickly as it had appeared. Replaced by the familiar coldness. Put it down, right now. Her voice was flat, but inside that flatness, Adwoa heard something trembling. Get out of this room. Adwoa set the photograph down, replaced it facing the wall, exactly where it had been. Then she pushed her cart out of the room, without a word. But her hands were trembling slightly. And that strange feeling was still there, sitting inside her chest, refusing to leave. 1 hour later, Emmanuel called for her. His voice was different, quieter, more careful. The voice of someone trying not to be overheard. Go up and see Mr. Asante, his office on the 2nd floor. Adwoa looked at him. Emmanuel did not explain further. He simply looked at her with an expression she could read immediately. The expression of a man trying to say, be strong. Adwoa knocked, entered. This was the first time she had truly seen Kwame Asante. Not a glimpse on the staircase, not a silhouette disappearing down a hallway, but truly seen him. He was sitting behind a large walnut desk, dark gray suit, tie removed and set to one side, signing documents. He did not look up when she entered. You are dismissed. His voice was flat, cold, like reading a line from a financial report. Not like speaking to a human being, sir. I did not do anything wrong. The library door was already open. Emmanuel told me to go in and clean. I was only doing what I was asked to do. I do not explain my decisions. But sir, human resources will process 3 days of pay. You may leave. Adwoa stood still. She looked at him. He still did not look up, still bent over his paperwork. She had things she wanted to say, many things. But Mrs. Ama had taught her, never plead with a person who will not look you in the eyes. A person who cannot meet your gaze when they speak to you is not a person worth explaining yourself to. Adwoa turned and walked out, back straight, head not bowed. At that exact moment, Kwame Asante looked up, just in time to catch her back. The straight posture, the even steps, unhurried, unshaking, the walk of someone who has not given up but will not bow down either. He watched until she disappeared behind the door. Then he looked back down at the paper in front of him. Read the line he had just signed. Read it a second time, a third time. Not a single word went in. Something about the way she walked, about the way she left without looking back, would not let him concentrate. He did not know why. He genuinely did not know why. He set his pen down, looked out the window. The sky over Accra was still that unusual blue. The blue of days when you do not yet know what just happened. But your body knows. Something had just changed. He just did not yet know what. That night, Kwame Asante did something he had not done in a very long time. He went into the locked room. The one at the end of the hallway on the second floor. The one nobody was permitted to enter. He did not go there often. Maybe once a month. Sometimes less. Helena had stopped asking about it years ago. She had learned that there were territories inside her husband that no amount of patience or persistence could reach. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, closed it behind him. The room was small, deliberately small. For a man who owned 16 bedrooms, this room was the size of a storage space. But that was the point. No grandeur, no performance, just a wooden table, one chair, one lamp, and on the table, a single photograph in a simple frame. The same photograph that Adwoa had held in her hands just hours earlier. He sat down in the chair and looked at the photograph for a long time without moving. The woman in the photograph. Her name was Amma. He had loved her when he was 26 years old. He had met her at a small cafe near the university. She was studying education, wanted to become a teacher. She used to bring handwritten notes to the dates. Not love letters. Notes about things she had read, things she was thinking about, things she wanted to discuss. She was the only person who had ever made Kwame feel like the most interesting version of himself. Not because of his ambition, not because of his family name, just because of who he was when he sat across from her and talked. They were together for 3 years, and then his father got involved. His father, a man who measured every relationship by what it could produce, what connections it could open, what social elevation it could bring. His father sat him down one evening, very calm, very measured, the way his father always spoke when he had already made a decision, and was simply informing you of it rather than discussing it. Amma Mensah is a seamstress's daughter. Her family has nothing. Her name opens no doors. You are about to become something significant in this country. The woman beside you when that happens must be someone who matches that significance. Kwame had argued. For the first and last time in his life, he had raised his voice at his father. But his father simply waited until he was finished, then said, I am not asking you to stop loving her. I am asking you to be smart. Love does not build empires. Kwame was 29 years old, and he was afraid, not of his father, of disappointing everything his father had worked toward, of being the weak point in a long chain of sacrifices, of choosing his heart and watching everything crumble around it. So he made a choice, and he lived with it. He remembered the afternoon he ended things with Amma. She was 7 months pregnant. He had asked her to meet him at the small cafe where they first spoke. She came wearing a yellow dress, her belly round and full, her face open, expecting something good, because she always expected something good from him. That was one of the things he loved most about her, and one of the things he could never forgive himself for betraying. He had rehearsed what he would say, had practiced in front of a mirror for 2 days, carefully constructed sentences that would somehow make an impossible thing sound reasonable. But when he sat down across from her and looked into her eyes, every rehearsed word dissolved, and all that came out was, Amma, I am sorry. She did not cry. That was what he had never been able to forget. She did not cry, did not beg, did not raise her voice. She looked at him for a long moment with those eyes, quiet and clear and absolutely seeing through him in a way that made him feel like the smallest version of himself he had ever been. Then she reached into her purse, placed some money on the table for her coffee, stood up and walked out. She did not look back, not once. Kwame had sat alone in that cafe for over an hour. He had expected to feel relief. He felt nothing, only the warmth still remaining in the chair across from him, where she had been sitting, where she would never sit again. He had tried to find her once, in 2008, nearly a decade after he walked away. He hired a private investigator. The report came back within 2 weeks. Ama Mensa, living in Kumasi, working as a seamstress, 1 daughter, never remarried. Kwame had held that report in his hands for a long time. Sitting at his desk in the office he had built from nothing, surrounded by evidence of everything he had achieved. And he had felt the full weight of everything he had lost. He had thought about going to find her, had thought about it for weeks. But in the end he told himself what cowards always tell themselves. It would only disturb their lives. They are doing well without me. It is better this way. He had folded the report, locked it in a drawer, and gone back to work. Now he sat in this small room, looking at the photograph, and thinking about the girl he had fired that morning. Girl from Kumasi, whose mother's name was Ama Mensa, who had walked out of the office with her back straight and her head not bowed, exactly the way her mother had walked out of that cafe 23 years ago. He picked up his phone, opened the employee record system, found her file. Adwoa Mensa, date of birth, 14th of March, 1999, place of birth, Kumasi, emergency contact. Ama Mensa, deceased. Kwame read that last word, deceased, and something in his chest collapsed quietly, like a wall that had been leaning for years and finally had nothing left to lean against. He set the phone on the table, face down, and he sat in the silence of that small room. That room he had built to hold the one thing he could never talk about, with the one photograph he could never throw away. And for the first time in 23 years, he did not try to hold himself together. He pressed his hands flat on the table, looked at the face of the woman he had abandoned, the woman who had raised their daughter alone, the woman whose hands had hardened from years of sewing, so that a child he had never met could eat and go to school and become someone. And Kwame Asante, one of the 10 most powerful men in Africa, a man who had not cried since his father's funeral, slid off the chair and sat on the floor, back against the wall, in the dark, alone, with 23 years of something that had no name pressing down on his chest, and the quiet, unbearable understanding that the daughter he had abandoned, had just walked into his house, looked for work, and he had sent her away, 30 seconds, without even looking at her face. The next morning Kwame came down to breakfast earlier than usual. The dining room was quiet the way it always was. Morning light coming through the tall windows. The smell of fresh coffee. Everything exactly as it should be, except nothing was as it should be. Helena was already at the table, sitting in her usual chair at the far end, reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee in front of her, steam rising slowly. She did not look up when he walked in. She turned a page, folded it neatly, the way she did everything, neatly, precisely, with complete control over every small gesture. Kwame pulled out the chair at his end of the table, sat down, did not pour coffee, did not reach for anything, just looked at her. Helena. She turned another page. He waited. Helena. She set the newspaper down, looked at him across the 6 meters of polished wood between them. Her face was composed, completely composed. The face of a woman who had been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. Do you know who that girl was? The one you dismissed yesterday. Helena looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it back down. Yes. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. One word. And everything around it went completely silent. Kwame felt something move through him. Not anger. Something colder than anger. How long? Helena set her cup down carefully, precisely in the center of the saucer. 2 years. He repeated the word quietly, as though testing whether it was real. When the employment agency sent over her application, I saw the name of her mother, Ama Mensa. I remembered that name. You told me about her. In the first year of our marriage. One evening when you had been drinking, you told me everything. You probably do not remember. But I remember every word. Kwame was very still and you said nothing. Helena looked at him steadily. I wanted to see her first. I needed to know what kind of person she was before I decided anything. And what did you decide? Helena was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not empty. The kind that is full of things being carefully chosen and things being deliberately left out. I decided to protect this family. That was what you decided. Kwame's voice was low. You decided to protect this family by sending away my daughter. She is not your daughter, Helena said. Her voice did not rise, did not shake. She said it the way you state a fact, the way you read a number from a balance sheet. You walked away from her before she was even born. You do not get to call her your daughter after 23 years, simply because she walked through your front door. The words hit him the way truth always hits, not loudly, but precisely, in exactly the place that is already bruised. He did not respond immediately. He looked at the woman sitting at the other end of the table. 20 years of marriage, 2 sons, a life constructed with extraordinary care and extraordinary distance. He had always known on some level that Helena understood more than she let on. She was too intelligent not to, too observant, too careful. But knowing she had kept this secret for 2 years, knowing she had looked at Adwoa's face and made a calculation, that was different. That was something else entirely. Why did you let her in at all? Helena looked down at her coffee. Her composure shifted almost imperceptibly, just a fraction. The way a very still surface shifts when something moves beneath it. Because, she stopped, started again, because I wanted to know if she was real. I had spent 2 years looking at that name on an application and telling myself it was a coincidence. Then she walked into this house. And I looked at her face, and I knew it was not a coincidence. What did you feel when you saw her? Helena looked up at him. And for the first time in longer than Kwame could remember, he saw something unguarded in her eyes, something that had not been carefully arranged before being shown to him. I felt afraid. She said it simply, without apology, without performance, just the plain truth of it. I felt afraid because I have spent 20 years being your wife, building this life, raising your sons, and I have always known that somewhere out there was the woman you actually chose, before your father made you choose differently. And I have always known that if that ever became real, if ever walked through our door, everything I had built would become a question, Helena. She held up her hand gently. Let me finish. She looked at him with clear eyes. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand why I did what I did. I made a decision from fear. And fear makes people do things they are not proud of. I know that. I knew it even as I was doing it. I am not asking you to excuse it. Kwame sat with that for a long moment. He thought about what it must have cost her to look at Adwoa's face, to recognize what she was looking at, and to say nothing, to simply instruct a manual to follow house rules, to sit across the table from him every evening and say nothing, to fold her newspaper neatly every morning and say nothing. He had spent 23 years carrying guilt about Amma, about a choice he made when he was 29 and afraid, and he had never once stopped to consider what Helena had been carrying alongside him, without ever being permitted to name it. You deserved better than this, he said it quietly. She looked at him, a real look, the kind they had not exchanged in years, not the measured diplomatic glances of 2 people managing a household together, but a real look between 2 people who had been circling the truth for a very long time. What happens now? She asked. Kwame looked at the window. Morning light was strengthening across the garden. The palm trees perfectly still. The garden perfectly arranged. Everything in its exact and proper place. I have to find her, he said. Helena nodded slowly. The nod of someone accepting something inevitable. Something they had known was coming long before it arrived, and after that, he turned back to look at her. I think we have needed to answer that question for a long time, Helena. Independent of any of this. She looked at him for a moment. Then something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite sorrow, something in between. Something that looked like the particular relief of a person who has been holding their breath for 20 years. And has finally been given permission to exhale. Yes, she said quietly, I think we have. They sat in silence after that, at opposite ends of the long table. The coffee going cold between them, the newspaper folded neatly to one side, and for the first time in 20 years of mornings spent in that room, the silence between them felt less like distance, and more like 2 people finally standing on the same ground, even if that ground was broken. Even if they did not yet know what could be built on it. The truth had been in the room for 2 years. It had been in the room, in a sense, for much longer than that. and now it was simply out in the open, where things that have been hidden long enough eventually always find their way. Kwame had the address from the employee file, a rented room in the Nima district, the poorest part of Accra. He had driven through Nima before, usually on the way to somewhere else, usually looking straight ahead, the way people who have money drive through places where people do not have money. With a kind of careful blindness, that morning he told his driver to stay home. He would go alone. He had not driven himself anywhere in 4 years. He sat behind the wheel of the least conspicuous car he owned, a dark gray sedan, not the Rolls-Royce, not the Mercedes. The gray sedan that his security team used for low-profile errands. Even so, when he turned into the narrow street in Nima, he felt the distance between his world and this one in a way that no amount of wealth could cushion. Children playing between parked cars. A woman selling plantain from a wooden cart. Laundry hanging from lines strung between windows. The smell of charcoal and rain, and something frying in oil. Life happening out in the open, loudly, unashamedly, the way life happens in places where there is no space to hide it indoors. He found the address. Parked across the street, turned off the engine, and sat there. He had faced boardrooms full of hostile investors, had negotiated with government ministers who wanted things he was not willing to give, had stood at podiums in front of thousands of people, and spoken without notes and without fear. But sitting in that car outside a building where his daughter rented a room, he could not move. He sat there for 22 minutes. He counted them. He counted them because he needed something concrete to hold on to. Because everything else in that moment felt like it was dissolving. What would he say? What could he possibly say? He was not there to ask for forgiveness. He knew he did not deserve that. He was not there to offer money. He understood instinctively that she would reject it, and that offering it would be the wrong thing entirely. He was not even sure he had the right to be there at all, but he could not stay away either. That was the truth of it. He could not stay away. He got out of the car, crossed the street, found the door, and knocked. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then he heard footsteps inside. Unhurried footsteps, the footsteps of someone who was not expecting anyone and was not rushing for anyone. The door opened. Adwoa looked at him. She was wearing a simple dress. Dark blue, her hair natural and unpinned, no shoes. She had clearly not been expecting visitors. For a moment neither of them spoke. She looked at him with an expression he could not immediately read. Not quite surprise, not quite recognition, something more guarded than either of those things. Then her eyes steadied, and she said, "What do you want? Not sir, not Mr. Asante, just what do you want?" And in those 3 words he heard something that reminded him so completely of Amma that he had to breathe carefully to keep his face from breaking open right there in the doorway. "I need to speak with you. I have nothing to say to you." She said it without hostility, just as a plain fact. "You fired me. We have no further business at Oa." She stopped. He had said her name. And something about the way he said it, not like an employer addressing a former staff member. Not like a powerful man summoning someone beneath him, but carefully, like a word he had been afraid to say out loud. Something shifted in her expression. Barely. But it shifted. "How do you know my name?" "I know more than your name," he said. "Can I come in, please?" The please surprised her. She looked at him for a long moment, assessing, the way her mother used to look at things, not with suspicion exactly, but with the clear-eyed patience of someone who takes their time before deciding what to trust. Then she stepped back from the door, just enough. He walked in. The room was small, immaculately tidy, a single bed with a plain white cover pulled taut across it, a small table with 2 chairs, a window with thin curtains letting in the afternoon light, a suitcase in the corner, partially open, a few books stacked beside it, and on the small table, a brown envelope, old and worn at the edges, sitting by itself, like it had been placed there deliberately, like it was waiting. Kwame looked at the envelope, and felt something move through him that he had no word for. "Sit down," Adwoa said. She did not sit herself. She stood near the window with her arms crossed. Not aggressively, just contained. Like someone keeping themselves carefully within their own boundaries until they understood what was happening. Kwame sat. He placed his hands flat on the table. Looked at them for a moment, then looked up at her. Your mother. Her name was Ama Mensa, from Kumasi. She was a seamstress. She was studying to be a teacher when she was young. She liked to bring handwritten notes to conversations, not because she wanted to show off what she knew, but because ideas mattered to her, and she wanted to talk about things that were real. Adwoa had gone very still. He kept going. She was 27 years old. She became pregnant. She was 7 months along when the man she was with told her he could not stay. She raised her daughter alone. For 23 years, she never remarried, and she died in March of last year of pancreatic cancer. The room was completely silent. Adwoa was looking at him with an expression he could not name. Her arms were no longer crossed. They had fallen to her sides. Her breathing had changed. But her eyes were steady, fierce and steady. Who are you? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Kwame reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, opened a photograph, placed it on the table and turned it to face her. The same photograph from the library, the young man with the wide smile, the woman with the pregnant belly, the golden afternoon light. Adwoa looked at the photograph, looked at the woman in it, and Kwame watched the recognition move across her face. Slow at first, then all at once, like light filling a room when someone opens a door. She looked up at him, then back at the photograph, then back at him. No, her voice cracked on that single syllable. No, that cannot be. I am sorry, he said it quietly. Those same 2 words he had said to her mother 23 years ago in a small cafe, except this time he meant something different by them. This time they were not the beginning of an abandonment. They were the beginning of something he did not yet have a name for, but that he knew he could not walk away from again. Adwoa turned away from him. She walked to the window, stood with her back to him. He could see her shoulders, the way they rose and fell with her breathing, the way she was working to keep herself together. He did not speak. He understood that this moment belonged to her, that the only right thing he could do was be still and let her have it. Then she turned back around. Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, with something more like the pressure of 23 years of a question finally arriving at its answer. She walked to the table, picked up the brown envelope, the one that had been sitting there waiting. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. My mother left me this. She told me to open it only when I was ready, only when I was strong enough. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Do you know what is inside? He shook his head. No, Amma never contacted me. I walked away and I stayed away. Whatever is in that envelope, she put there without me. Adwoa looked at the envelope in her hands. Then she sat down across from him, at the small table in the small room, with the thin curtains moving softly in the afternoon breeze, and she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, the handwriting of someone more accustomed to holding a needle than a pen, and a small photograph, old and faded, of a young man and a young woman, sitting outside somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame, young and unguarded and completely unaware of everything that was coming. Adwoa read the letter silently first, her eyes moving slowly across the lines. Kwame watched her face, watched the emotions move through it the way weather moves across open ground. Then she looked up at him, and she read it aloud. My darling Adwoa, if you are reading this, then I am already gone, and you are strong enough. I always knew you would be. There is a man. His name is Kwame Asante. He is your father. He did not leave because he did not love us. He left because he was afraid, and fear makes people do things they spend the rest of their lives regretting. I do not tell you this so that you will forgive him. Forgiveness is yours to give or not give in your own time and on your own terms. I tell you this because you have spent your whole life carrying a question that deserved an answer, and you deserve to know where you came from. You came from love, even if that love was not strong enough to stay. You came from a moment that was real, whatever happened after it. You are not the consequence of a mistake. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Go and find your answer if you need it, or do not. Either way, I am proud of you, more than I ever knew how to say. All my love always, Mama. The room was silent for a long time after she finished reading. Outside, the sounds of Nima continued. Children playing, music from somewhere, a woman calling out a name. Life going on the way it always does. indifferent to the private earthquakes happening behind closed doors. Adwoa folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, set it on the table. Then she looked at Kwame Asante, really looked at him, the way her mother used to look at things, clear and patient and missing nothing. You left her. Yes, you left her when she was pregnant. Yes, you built an empire, and you never came back. I tried once, he said, in 2008. I hired someone to find her. I found she was in Kumasi, that she had a daughter, that she was managing, and then he stopped. And then you told yourself it was better not to disturb their lives, Adwoa said. He nodded. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. Her expression was not angry. It was something more precise than anger. It was the expression of someone seeing something very clearly and deciding exactly what they think of it. That is what cowards tell themselves, she said. That it's better for everyone if they stay away, when really they just cannot face what they did. He did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. She was right. She was completely and precisely right. He sat across from her in that small room and he let the truth of it sit on him without trying to move it or rearrange it or make it more comfortable. Because it was not comfortable. And it was not supposed to be. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Nothing, he said. I want nothing from you. You do not owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not a relationship, not even this conversation. I came because I could not stay away. Because you walked into my house and I sent you away without looking at your face. And I have spent 23 years not looking, and I cannot do it anymore. Adwoa was quiet for a long moment. Outside the light was changing. The afternoon moving toward evening, the golden hour settling over Nima the same way it settled over everywhere else. Indiscriminate, unhurried. She looked at the photograph still lying on the table between them, at her mother's face, young and full of light. Then she looked at the man sitting across from her, the stranger who was not a stranger, the father who was not a father. Not yet, maybe not ever. She did not know. I am not ready to forgive you. I may never be. I need you to understand that clearly. I understand. Good. She set the photograph down, looked at her hands, and back at him. But I have spent my whole life not knowing where I came from, and now I know. And I need some time to decide what to do with that. He nodded. Take whatever time you need. I am not going anywhere. She looked at him at that. A long, careful look. Then she said something he did not expect. My mother never stopped loving you. She never said it, but I knew. The way she never talked about you, the way she looked sometimes when she thought I was not watching, she never stopped. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. When he opened them, she was still looking at him. I think that is the saddest thing I have ever said out loud, she said quietly. He did not have an answer for that. There was no answer for it. Only the sitting with it. The two of them, in the small room. In the fading afternoon light. Sitting with the weight of everything that happened. And everything that could not be undone. And the very small and very fragile and entirely uncertain question of what, if anything, might still be possible. The DNA results came back on a Thursday morning. Kwame was sitting at his desk in the Asante Tower when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. One number. 99.98%. He set the phone face down on the desk, sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it back down, and stared out the window at the city spread below him. 47 floors of glass and steel between him and the ground. And yet in that moment he had never felt less elevated in his life. He had known. Of course he had known. The moment he looked at her eyes, he had known. But knowing and having it confirmed in a laboratory with a percentage attached to it were two different things entirely. One was a feeling, the other was a fact, and fact of a weight that feelings sometimes do not. He called his lawyer first, then he called Emmanuel. Then he sat alone in his office 40 minutes and did not call anyone at all. Just sat, looking at the city. Thinking about a woman in Kumasi who had spent 23 years raising his daughter alone, who had hardened her hands at a sewing machine so that a child he had never met could eat and go to school and become someone worth knowing, and who had died without ever asking him for anything, not a single thing. That last part was what undid him most, that Amma had never reached out, never called, never sent a letter, never asked for money or support or acknowledgement. She had simply taken what he had left her with, which was nothing, made something from it, by herself, in a small house in Kumasi, with a Singer sewing machine and 2 hands that never stopped moving. He had built an empire, and she had built a person. He was no longer sure which of those things was the greater achievement. That evening he came home to find Helena in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine. The television on, but the sound turned low. She looked up when he walked in. He sat down across from her, not at a distance, in the chair closest to the sofa, the closest they had physically sat to each other in an ordinary moment, even longer than he could remember. The results came back. She looked at him. I know. He had texted her earlier. She nodded slowly, said nothing. Outside, through the tall windows, the garden was dark, the pool lights on, blue water shimmering in the stillness. How are you feeling? She asked. He thought about it genuinely. Not the reflexive find that he usually produced when people asked that question, but actually thought about it, like I wasted a lot of time. He said, on the wrong things. Helena looked at her wine glass, turned it slowly in her hands. We both did. He looked at her. Helena, I know I was not the husband I should have been. I know our marriage has not been what either of us deserved. I know that a large part of that is because I have been carrying something for 23 years that I never dealt with properly. And you have been living with the shadow of that without ever being able to name it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I knew what I was getting into. On some level, not the details, but the shape of it. I knew you had left something unfinished. I thought I could manage around it. She paused. I was wrong about that. What do we do now? He asked. She set her wine glass down. Looked at him with the clearest look she had given him in years. I think we need to be honest with each other. For the first time. Really honest. Not managed, not diplomatic. Actually honest. He nodded. I think we need help to do that, she continued. A counselor. Someone who is not connected to either of our families or our social circle or our business. Someone neutral. He nodded again. I think that is right. She looked at her hands, then back at him. And Kwame, whatever happens between us, I need you to know something. She chose her words carefully. The way Helena always chose her words. But this time without the usual protective layer of precision over them. I did not spend 20 years with you because of your money or your name. I spent 20 years with you because I believed there was something real between us. Underneath everything else. Underneath all the performance and the distance and the things we never said. Something real. I still believe that. Do you? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. I do. She nodded. Then that is where we start. He reached across the space between them and placed his hand over hers on the arm of the sofa. She looked down at his hand. Then she turned hers over and held it. They sat like that for a while, not talking, just sitting in the quiet of a house that had been too quiet for too long. But a different kind of quiet now. Not the quiet of two people performing distance. The quiet of two people trying to find their way back to something. Or perhaps forward to something entirely new. That evening, Kwame called his 2 sons. Kofi was 19, studying business in London. Nana was 17, still at home. He called Kofi first, told him everything. There was a long silence on the line after he finished. Then Kofi said, Is she okay? Are you asking if she is okay? Yes, Kwame said. He thought for a moment. I think she is more than okay. I think she is one of the most grounded people I have ever met. Another silence. Then, does she know about us? About me and Nana? Not yet, he said. That is her choice to make, when she is ready, if she is ready. Another long pause. Dad. Kofi's voice was careful but not cold. I am not going to pretend this is easy to hear, but I think you did the right thing by telling me yourself, rather than letting me find out some other way. Kwame held the phone and felt the specific weight of being known by your child, even imperfectly. Even through all the years of distance and performance and carefully maintained surfaces, his son was looking at him clearly and not turning away. He called Nana next. Nana was quieter than his brother, always had been. He listened to everything without interrupting. When Kwame finished, there was a long silence. Then Nana asked the question that Kofi had not asked. Do you love her? Kwame paused. I do not know her yet, he said honestly. I only just found her. But I want to. I want very much to know her. Nana was quiet again then. She grew up without a dad, he said it simply, not as an accusation. Just as a fact named. Yes, Kwame said. She did. That must have been really hard. Yes, he said. It was. I think it was very hard. Nana exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. Okay, he said. Okay, 3 days after the DNA results, Kwame drove back to Nima. He had called ahead this time. Edwoa answered after 3 rings. He had not been sure she would answer at all. He told her the results. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I already knew, he said. Me too. Can I come and see you? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, yes. He brought nothing with him, no gifts, no flowers, no envelope of money or documents, or anything that could be interpreted as a transaction. Just himself. She opened the door when he knocked. This time she was expecting him. This time her face was different. Not warm exactly, not yet, but open. The way a window is open. Not inviting you in necessarily, but no longer closed against you either. They walked to a small chop bar around the corner from her building. Plastic table. 2 plastic chairs. A woman behind a counter who served them rice and stew without asking what they wanted, because there was only one thing on offer, and that was the point. They ate together for the first time. Kwame Asante, who had eaten at restaurants with Michelin stars, who had had breakfast with heads of state and dinner with royalty, ate rice and stew at a plastic table in Nima, and found that he could not remember the last time a meal had tasted that real. They did not talk about the big things. Not that day. They talked about small things. He asked about her studies. She asked about how he started his business. He told her about the first deal he ever made that went wrong. She told him about a time she got lost on her first day in Accra and ended up in a neighborhood she did not recognize and sat on a curb for 20 minutes before asking for directions. They laughed once, briefly, about something small and unimportant, and then looked at each other with a kind of surprise, like 2 people who had not expected to laugh together, and were not quite sure what to do with the fact that they had. When the food was finished and the plates were cleared away, they sat for a moment in the comfortable discomfort of everything still unsaid. Then Edwoa looked at him across the table. I have a question. He nodded. Go ahead. Why did you fire me without looking at my face? He held her gaze. Because Helena told me to dismiss you and I did not ask why. I just signed off on it. The way I sign off on things. Without looking closely enough, she considered that. That is honest. Yes, he said. It is also the story of a lot of things I have gotten wrong. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. I'm not going to make this easy for you, I know. Good, she said, because it should not be easy. You do not get to walk back into a life after 23 years and have it be easy. No, he said. You do not. She nodded. Then she stood up, picked up her bag, and looked at him one final time before leaving. Same time next week, she said. Not a question, an offer. He stood as well. Same time next week. She walked away down the street. He stood and watched her go, the straight back, the even steps. The way she moved through the world, like someone who had learned very early that the world was not going to arrange itself around her comfort, and had made her peace with that, and built herself around it instead. He thought about Amma, about a girl in a yellow dress sitting across from him in a small cafe 30 years ago, bringing handwritten notes to their conversations because ideas mattered to her. And he thought about what she had built, from nothing, from less than nothing, from the wreckage of what he had left her with. She had built this woman walking away down the street in Nima, with her back straight and her head not bowed. Kwame Asante stood on the street in Nima until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about what Nana had said. She grew up without a dad. That must have been really hard. Yes, he thought, it was, and the least I can do now is show up every week. For as long as it takes, for as long as she will let me. He started the engine and drove. 6 months is not a long time. In the life of a business, it is 1 quarter and a half. In the life of a marriage, it is barely enough time to change a habit. But in the life of 2 people learning how to exist in each other's presence, without the weight of pretending, without the performance of things that are not yet true, 6 months can feel like the beginning of something that does not yet have a name, but is starting to have a shape. Kwame and Edwoa met every week, same day, same time, not always at the chop bar in Nima. Sometimes they walked off. Sometimes they drove out to the edge of the city where the building thinned and there was actual sky to look at instead of construction and noise. Off. Sometimes they sat in his car in a parking lot and talked for 2 hours because neither of them had planned anything and neither of them wanted to stop. Off. They did not call each other father and daughter. Not yet, perhaps not ever. That was a conversation still waiting for the right moment. Off. And both of them seemed to understand without saying, so that it would arrive when it was ready, or it would not arrive at all. Off. And the world would keep turning either way. What they called each other was nothing formal. She called him Kwame. He called her Adwoa, 2 names, clean and unadorned. Off. Without the weight of titles, neither of them had earned with the other yet. In the 3rd month, something shifted. They had driven out toward a buri, parked facing the hills. Off. That particular view that makes the city feel very far away and the sky feel very large. Adwoa was telling him about a time when she was 14. Off. She had come home from school upset because a teacher had embarrassed her in front of the class. Her mother had listened to the whole story without interrupting. Off. Then she said, "Go and wash your face. We are going out." They had taken a trotro across town to a restaurant they could not afford. Off. Ordered 1 meal and split it between them. And her mother had said, "Sometimes you have to do the expensive thing on a cheap budget." Off. Just to remind yourself that you deserve the expensive thing. Kwame laughed. Not politely, genuinely, the kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. Off. Adwoa looked at him laughing, and something in her face softened in a way he had not seen before. "You laugh like her," she said quietly. He stopped. Off. She looked out the window, not quite smiling, but close. She used to laugh exactly like that, sudden, like it caught her off guard. Off. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing. He just sat with it. The strange and unearned gift of being told you carry something of a person you wronged. Off. Something that traveled through blood and silence in 23 years and ended up in you, even though you did nothing to deserve it. Off. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment, because this is one of the most important things this story has to say. Off. We spend so much of our lives afraid of what we have passed on to the people we love, our fears, our failures, our worst moments. Off. We worry that our children will carry our damage forward into their own lives, and sometimes they do. That is true. But sometimes, without our knowing, without our trying. Off. We also pass on the things that are most alive in us, the laugh that catches people off guard, the way of seeing the world. Off. The particular light that was ours before we learned to dim it. Ama Mensa spent 23 years raising a daughter alone. She could not give her money. Off. Could not give her a father. Could not give her the things that the world said a child needed to have a fair start. Off. But she gave her something that no amount of money can manufacture. She gave her the belief that she deserved the expensive thing, even on a cheap budget. Off. Even when the world said otherwise. That is not a small thing. That is everything. They drove to Kumasi on a Saturday morning, left Accra before sunrise. Off. The road still dark and quiet. Woa slept for the first hour. Kwame drove without music, just the road in the dark and his daughter asleep in the passenger seat. Off. And the feeling of something he had almost missed entirely now sitting quietly beside him in the dark. They arrived as the city was waking. Off. Drove through streets he had not been on in 30 years, past the university, past the small cafe where things had ended with Ama all those years ago. Off. He did not point these things out. Some things do not need to be said out loud. They arrived at the house with the blue door in the Adam district. Off. Someone else lived there now. Different curtains. A child's bicycle against the wall. Adwoa stood on the pavement and looked at the window on the upper floor for a long time. That was her room. Off, she said. She worked up there every night. I used to fall asleep on the chair beside her. She would carry me to bed and then go back and keep sewing. Off. He stood beside her and looked at that window. And what he understood, standing there on that street, was something he needs you to understand too. Off. Strength is not always loud. Most of the time, real strength is completely silent. It is a woman sitting alone at a sewing machine at midnight. Off. After her child had fallen asleep, sewing in the quiet, not because she is heroic, not because she is extraordinary, but because someone is depending on her. Off. And that is enough of a reason. We celebrate the loud kind of strength. The kind you can see, The kind that gets written about in newspapers and talked about at dinner tables. But the strength that actually holds the world together. The strength that raises children and keeps families alive and refuses to let bitterness become a legacy. That strength happens in rooms no one else is in, at hours when no one else is watching, by people who never once think of themselves as strong. Because they are too busy just doing what needs to be done. Ama Mensa was that kind of strong, and we should say her name like it means something. Because it does. Adwoa looked at the window for a little while longer. Then she said quietly, she never complained. Not once. Not to me, maybe in private. I hope she had somewhere to put it, but she never put it on me. He nodded. He thought about that for a moment before he responded. Then he said, do you know how rare it is to carry something that heavy and make the decision every single day, not to put it down on the person who needs you most? That is not just love. That is discipline. That is the highest form of love there is. Adwoa looked at him. Something moved across her face. She nodded slowly. I know, she said. It is also the thing I think about most when I think about what kind of person I want to be. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because that is the real inheritance. Not money, not property, not a name. The real inheritance that Ama Mensa left her daughter was a standard, a way of being in the world, a quiet insistence that love does not excuse you from discipline. That the people who depend on you deserve the best of you, even on the days when you have almost nothing left to give. That is what she passed on. And Adwoa carried it, all the way from a small house in Kumasi, to a rented room in Nima, to a plastic table in a chop bar, to the passenger seat of her father's car on a road heading home. They turned away from the house with the blue door and walked back toward the car. Kwame walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. And as they walked, I want to tell you what this story is really about. Because it is not about a billionaire. Not really. The billionaire is just the vehicle, the thing that gets your attention. What this story is really about is this. Every single one of us will face a moment, maybe we already have, where we have to choose between what is safe and what is right. Between what is comfortable and what is true. Between staying in the room when it is hard, or walking away because walking away is easier. Kwame Asante walked away. And he spent 23 years building an empire to fill the space that cowardice left inside him. And here is the thing about that. The empire did not fill it. It never does. The things we run away from do not get smaller with time. They get quieter. They learn to wait. They sit in locked rooms at the end of hallways, in photographs facing the wall, in the faces of strangers who turn out not to be strangers at all. You cannot outbuild your regrets. You cannot outwork them. You cannot outrun them. Eventually, they find you. The only question is whether they find you soon enough to do something about it. Kwame was lucky. He found out in time to show up, imperfectly, awkwardly, without any guarantee of being accepted. But he showed up, and that matters. Because here is the last thing this story wants to say to you. It is never too late to show up. That is not a comfortable thing to say to someone who has been waiting for an apology for 23 years. I understand that, but it is true. It is never too late to turn the photograph around, to stop pretending the locked room does not exist, to drive to a neighborhood you would normally drive past, and knock on a door, without knowing what is on the other side, without any promise that you will be welcomed, but showing up anyway. Because the person on the other side of that door deserved your presence a long time ago, and they deserve it now.